Hello, welcome to this video. Thank you so much for tuning in and sharing this now moment with myself and with one another. Those of you who haven't seen these videos before, welcome back if you have. My intention is benevolence for all in alignment with the highest levels of love light. Let's get started. Hopefully this microphone is working. I just recorded and it wasn't working. Right? If you have seen my videos before, you understand that sometimes I have technical difficulties. So I wanted to go into a little Keep It Simple Starseeds video today for a question that I've actually been asked a few times. And we all, maybe you've heard that when you hear something 2 or 3 times, it's time to listen and pay attention, that might be relevant for the collective. Oftentimes I'll have sessions where I work with, let's say, 5 different people, starseeds, light workers, and there's a common thread among each of the beings that I'm working with that perhaps I can utilize for the collective. And that's oftentimes what I'll do is after having these sessions, I'll put together a video that I'll see something that's happening maybe in that collective group that I've been working with. And that's a whole other video to kind of explain what I mean by collective groups, but just groups of people that might be experiencing or going through the same types of circumstances or activations, because it isn't the same for everybody. And that's a whole other video. But this video particularly is to answer a question from a light worker. So I just want to start off by saying, if you've sent me a question before, I try to answer it if it's a collective question. I do videos and there's a lot that goes on. I'm trying to update Facebook and Instagram and doing the session work in addition to uploading the videos and getting all of this stuff right. I've been kind of on a journey for the past year, and it seems like when I get one thing figured out, then something else comes up for me to kind of figure out next. And as you guys know, that when you're learning things, for me, I want to just be able to produce the material and create, but it doesn't always work that way. In order to share that, you have to figure out the platforms as well. So I've just been doing it all on my own, and it's quite the experience so far, and I'm really grateful for it, but it can be at times time consuming. So that eventually will, I'm sure, get better and easier. Maybe someday I'll be able to hire somebody to do all of that for me so I can just create. But I do believe we all go through experiences sometimes for higher reasons, of course. And some of this has taught me some valuable lessons about patience, right? And also things I didn't think that I could do on my own, I've kind of figured out in the process. So it's all working together, and that I think assists us sometimes in our creative process, is the actual process of figuring everything out. So I just wanted to share that because I see that that's very representative of a lot of things in our lives. So this question that I have, this is the Keep It Simple Starseeds video. It is not light language, so if you're interested in light language or the inflow energy sharing transmissions that I share, I did post one, I think, on Friday and on Sunday. The Saturday one, I got a little bit more personal, and I was sharing some energetic threads that I was seeing from showing up for shadow aspect, full moon aspect for myself, as well as other friends and family, and sessions that I had been seeing the common thread among session work that I had been called to do, or that people had been called to work with me this week. So it was a very interesting week. But one of the questions that I had that I really am excited to kind of talk about today came from a beautiful starseed who's also an artist. So if you're an artist, well, we'll talk about that at the end, what I'm going to suggest about, hopefully I'll remember to talk a little bit about platforms. If I don't, you can always send me a question and remind me. So if you have a question for the collective experience, you're more than welcome to send. Oh, this is really delayed. Hopefully it catches up. Maybe I'm moving around too much. Either way, you're more than welcome to send me a note or message me on carryyvonne.com. Of course, if it's personal and it's some type of personal activation that you're wanting, that of course would be separate, and you're more than welcome to set up a session. But if it's something for the collective that other people can benefit from, which oftentimes happens anyways in a session because we're all part of the collective. So let me just clarify what that is. So for example, if someone is going through some personal turmoil, or they just want to know a little bit about their personal experience that might be affecting them right now, that would be one thing. If it's something like, well, what's going on with the energy right now, or what does it mean if we're seeing a shooting star? I don't know. You know what I mean? Something a little bit more broad. That's where I'll try to answer that if that question comes up a few times from a few different people. So this was a personal question, but it's really actually a great collective question. And it was from Rachel Jean Art, and she's also on Instagram at Rachel Jean Art, and I follow her on Instagram. And then she follows me on at Keep It Simple Starseeds. And she said, Carrie, can you please give me some examples if I were to receive a download? What would I think, feel, or hear, etc.? I know it's highly personalized and different for each person. I've had people tell me that they see light codes in my artwork, and I simply can't see it. What does a light code look or feel like to you? Also, and she has the, we were talking about the Southern Cross. I'm going to bring that up because that'll be an example of an activating song by Crosby, Stills, and Nash. I brought it up in this video that she questioned me on, and I don't remember what video it was. But thank you for that question. You're not the only person that's asked that question, and so I'm finally answering it. Again, if I don't get back to someone, it's, you know, sometimes those questions do fall between the cracks and I end up seeing them later, and sometimes it's a long time later. So I'm doing the best I can to follow through so that we can kind of share the word about these light codes right now. So this is obviously looks like a lot, but it's really not. And I'm going to start off by talking about what light codes are from my perspective. So this particular light worker is an artist, and so she paints, and people are activated from seeing her artwork. And you guys know, many of you that are watching these videos either do that themselves or have experienced that through, and it's the same thing that happens through my light language or my toning that I offer with you guys, or it can happen through hand movements. It can happen through dance. It can happen through, so I've talked a little bit about the places that we can receive these downloads and activations from. And I'm just kind of trying to remember. I did a video about that. I'll try to go back and find it, but I have so many videos I posted, I need to get them organized eventually. So what happens is these, so you can feel this information come through in all of these different ways. It can be through writing, drawing, poetry, artwork, song, words, language. All of these things can be activating. Light codes to me, and I want to just back up and say that this is all from my perspective. Somebody else may have a completely different perspective, and they're going to be 100% right from their own perspective as well. So everybody is different. From my perspective, one of the easiest ways that I can explain light codes from somewhat of a linear perspective, but it's a very multidimensional answer. But I like to just say that it's a sharing of information, okay? Packets of information. That's what these light codes are. The easiest explanation is they're packets of information. And we could go like into a completely different video just on that. And I could go into flow about that. Maybe I will eventually. But I'm saying in this video, it's sharing your information in an organized communication or flow that can be felt. And when I say felt, sensed, remembered. Or sometimes it's not always felt. It just activates and we may not realize it at all. But our body knows it, or we remember things. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. Somebody posted something. So when I say information, it's in and it's manifesting in a form. So it's taking form. It's not just light. It's light now in some sort of cohesive, organized code. And that's just one perspective. So I had read something on Instagram recently, and I apologize because I'm really messing up the way the post was made. So I will do my best to go and find this post and share it. I knew I should have bookmarked it, and I just saw it briefly, and it triggered something, held some information, and it activated a memory within me, and I felt like, oh yes, aha. So I'm going to get to that in just a moment, because that's an activation. Anything really can activate us if it's stimulating a particular response that is sending a signal to our brain, body, or from our highest aspect into our bodies, right? I'm going a little multi-layered here, but does that make sense? So I'll talk a little bit about that with the Southern Cross. Rachel's art is a little different than just a particular song, and using it as a metaphor to remember something, much like Magenta Pixie. She uses a lot of metaphors, yet they're also highly activating, as is the intention behind the work. So I'm kind of going off on a tangent. I hope you guys are kind of following. So I'm going to try to keep this in a linear order. So somebody posted on Instagram that they, I'm kind of yelling, sorry, I forgot I had the microphone on. They were talking about like the old paradigm versus the new paradigm. And one of the things they used was the influencer was the old way, and now it's something different. And I can't remember. I'm going to call it activator. But more importantly, I'm going to call it being the influencer. So rather than being influenced by someone else and following that person because they know everything, we are the inflow masters. So we're in flow and we aren't being led by someone else. We can be inspired by someone else, and that's completely different. We're not saying, oh, I want to be that person, so therefore I'm going to dress, act, follow that person like a sheep. I'm going to say, wow, that person really inspires me. This is who I am. And this is a sharing rather than a hierarchy. And I did talk about this in more detail in another video. So when we are being activated or getting downloads of information or packets of information from another starseed, I'm going to kind of say this is a little different than the earth and the sun activations, downloads, upgrades, and all of that. But we can kind of use it as it's the same too. How do I know that's kind of all over the place, but what we're receiving from the earth and what we're receiving, it can be the same and it could be different. And I'm not going to go into all of that multidimensionality in this particular video. I'm just going to try to keep it with the artwork and the writing that we're doing in human form. So these influencers, I didn't even know what an influencer was. I had to actually see that movie called Fire Island. It's so ridiculous and so representative of it's sad but funny at the same time, but I didn't know that's what an influencer was until I saw that, and I went, oh. So basically when we're sharing light codes with one another, we are in flow, and we're bringing forward through us that information in light, enlightenment, in light of meaning, bringing it into manifestation and offering meaningful interaction in simulation in this holographic representation of light codes. That's an inflow kind of answer to what we're doing. Obviously, you can see, feel, hear, read between the lines on that. That statement in itself, from where I'm expressing this message, can be activating in itself. One or two or all of those words in my energy behind the words and my intention, okay, bringing it forward in a, what they show me is when I say intention, they break it down into intent ion. So it's like an ionization, IM. And if you think of a tent, it's in the shape of a pyramid. And essentially it's like a prism, like Pink Floyd, right? The Dark Side of the Moon. It's a rainbow coming through the prism, and then I'm sending it out from this heart projector into the field that we are existing in simultaneously. So that's one version of many and one description of what light codes are, or how they're sent or received. And we are then transmitting as transmitters, and you are also transmitters. We are conduits receiving as receptors, receptacles, holding a vibration, and then emitting those frequencies. And that's another continued expansive explanation of what light codes are or how they're presented. So light codes are essentially packets of information. And you guys, this isn't the only answer. There's so many. And then I don't know if I already said this, I'm going to repeat it again. In organized communication or flow, this can usually be felt, not always. So sometimes this happens while we're sleeping. So I want to answer Rachel's question directly, because this is, so we'll start with that. So that's just a general concept of what this all is. This is why people feel activated when they hear somebody toning, speaking light language, singing from a certain frequency, listening to a certain type of music or tone, seeing artwork, reading a presentation of words in flow, in combinations, seeing a geometry in a numerical order, and this is, or seeing somebody do hand motions. I've mentioned Romeo as well as some other starseeds. Baron on his, or Sacred Romeo, excuse me, on his work of bringing through codes. There's also other beings that do it through dance and flow. And sometimes it's a combination of all of those things, right? And I'm sure I might be missing something in that mix, but I think I've covered a lot of it. And I was guided to share it's like inspiration. So it's in spiral. It's a wave formation that is coming through, spiraling up our spire, creating a fire and igniting this knowingness within us. And that's going to lead me into this next. What is that knowingness? I kind of lost, I wanted to get back into, well, and then we're creating it. So they were asking me to play with words on creativity. What is that? Well, it's our IV, intravenous. It's in our blood. It's firing up our blood. And it's bringing forward these creative codes that are assisting us in creating our reality. That's what light codes offer. That's what they do from one of many perspectives. And we are constantly in contact with one another, offering these codes in a dynamic interchange, interplay of activity or interconnectivity. This can even be done through meditation. It doesn't have to be done through, it can be done through visualization. So essentially, it can happen anyhow, anyway. I'm going to get back to specific artwork in just a minute. I wanted to touch briefly on, I don't know if this is focused, but briefly on Earth and the sun. And because we're constantly receiving this from the sun and the earth as well. That's not exactly where I'm going with this, but I just wanted to just remind everybody that yes, we are getting this from the earth, the sun, Water is a huge code carrier. So I'm just going to touch briefly on the creative aspect of these light codes today. So the question was also some examples of, she doesn't know, she was saying about what do they look or feel like. So that's what they are. They look like, they can look like anything. I know that sounds so broad. I'm going to give you some examples. I'm not just going to leave it at that. But light is light. It holds information in all form. So anything that takes a form in it can be activating. So I want to touch briefly on intention. So oftentimes with music, it's obviously visceral because it's a sound. So we're feeling it because of the way our brain is interpreting it, our bones and the cones in our eye. Okay, so the crystals in our ears are vibrating. So we feel it, we can feel it that way. With the artwork, the cones in our eyes, our receptors are responding to stimulation from that sight color. But if you think about it, a color and a shape holds a vibration in itself. So if I draw something and you haven't seen it yet, think of sacred geometry. It's already a code in the universe. It's so hard to explain all of this in a linear format. It's funny, but why do you think when we see sacred geometry, we're like, whoa, I feel that. Because we are that. We are that geometry. We are that mathematical expression in formation. Ions. So there's a lot of different ways, is what I'm saying, that we can interpret this, that we can interpret the artwork. So sometimes it's based on what we know, what we've mapped out in our lives, but sometimes it is just because it triggers a feeling or a remembrance, or it's a mathematical connection to our blueprint, our Akash, or our entire creative aspect. We are in coherence in that golden ratio or golden spiral. I always get those two confused, but we'll say golden spiral, right? Golden means we're in that implosion. And so when we connect with something that brings us into a space of gratitude, joy, bliss, peace, many of those feelings, it can create a spark. Not everything is activating in that way. Sometimes it can bring up a fear. Sometimes it'll bring up a memory, and those all are certain codes as well. So I'm not going to go into those though. We're just going to talk back on the easiest explanation, which is how does it feel? So, and maybe some of you, because I think maybe that'll explain why sometimes people feel a certain way with the light language. It doesn't necessarily, I want to touch briefly on that because it's artwork as well. I will see light language in artwork, and I don't necessarily read verbatim what that means. I can see hieroglyphs in the ancient Egyptian pyramids, and they can activate something within me. I know in my highest aspect knows what that means. So if I channel that through my heart, and I'm going to talk about channeling in just a minute, because we can use, it's not, channeling isn't just bringing forward some entity and having them speak through us. Our heart is a channel. What are we plugging into? So if I channel that through my heart and I connect that with all that I am, I can oftentimes feel what that hieroglyph, language, piece of artwork, color, shape, number, fill in the blank, represents. That doesn't mean I can say, oh, that represents the letter, the word the. I could say bird. This hieroglyph represents a bird, or it represents a bird tribe, Or it could represent peace. It could represent, you know, what bird is it? Is it an eagle? Is it a hawk? That can represent a message. It's so vast, and it is different for everyone. And so is language, because some people might say, well, yeah, but if I say, I'm going to use love as an example. Obviously, if I say blue, we know that has a meaning. And I've used this before, but I love to use it as an example. If I tell you that color is blue, yes, that's it. The color is blue, and it might just end on that. That's the meaning. But the person is going to not necessarily, not everybody sees blue in the same way. Some people see blue and they associate it with sadness because that's their mapping system. Some people say blue and they associate it with water. Some people associate it with the sky, which would be in association with air. Some people see blue and they associate it with an animal. You see where I'm going with this? And we do these associations constantly, and we aren't even necessarily aware of it. It's happening on a subconscious level, and it's happening, but it's still happening. So that's where I'm tying this all in with activations, because we might see someone's artwork and it's encoded, and we don't even realize why it's necessarily making us feel a certain way or sound healing or light language. Sound healing is a little different because it can actually be scientifically shown to vibrate at a certain frequency. But what I'm trying to share with artwork is that if it holds a shape, if it holds a color, it holds a vibration. And also back to blue. Blue holds a frequency within it. And if we are connected, let's say, to the blue ray in our ancestry, just seeing that color can trigger that memory, because blue in itself is a light code for us. Do you see how cool and expansive this is? We could associate cool with blue because we would usually associate red with warm, right? So it's very interesting how this all works because it is infinite. So the light codes, as far as that goes also, I got a little into the rabbit hole there. So when we're thinking in this expansive way, it allows all of these activations to happen sometimes all at once. Okay. Whew. Speaking of activating, just talking about this makes me feel expansive, and it's so much fun. So thank you for sharing this with me. So basically, most of the time this can be felt. Oftentimes it can be felt, not most of the time, but quite frequently it can be felt. I want to touch briefly on, so let me just go on pause for just a moment. Okay, I'm back on track, back on the train track. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about was intention, because in this particular artist's example, she may not be, so I'm using the example of me seeing artwork, and I see light codes and things as well. I might not say that means it's a blue bird. Some people do. I don't see things that way. I'm going to do a video maybe perhaps down the road on the way, in different ways people learn, which ties in a little bit with dyslexia. But for myself, I don't necessarily get things verbatim. I never have, but I didn't realize that until a few years ago. So, and if somebody gets that verbatim, that's awesome. But again, the Tibetans, I think, have like 30 different meanings for the word love. So that means that there might be 30 different words that all have a slightly different variation, frequency, angle to tie all back in with love. So it depends on where the person is in their energy, frequency, vibration, and perspective of what information they're getting when they receive these light codes and when those light codes activate. So I wanted to touch briefly on that. So going back into intention, Rachel may not see the codes literally as she's sharing her inspiration, as she's being an inflow answer. On my Instagram, I kind of call myself an inflower, right? Because that's what I'm just in flow, and I'm sharing that. That's what artists are doing. They're in flow, and musicians, and all kinds of, anything. If you're in flow, you are sharing that energy and bringing it through onto paper. You're channeling that energy from one perspective. You're being a conduit for your source, which of course ideally is source directly. Or we could say it's our higher self. We do have, and that's another video, I won't go off on that tangent, but let's say we're pulling through that information, it's coming through, and this is going to be shown, and this will, when you're really inspired and you're just in flow, sometimes we don't necessarily, we go, wow, okay, it feels good. That is expressed through ink, through paint, through a medium, and brought into manifestation in formation. So that's essentially what is being shared. That's why these codes can be seen or felt. It is intuitive. IV, it's in the blood. So, and I'm not just talking about intravenously, that is also in our mapping system. When I think of veins, I think of roots, I think of maps, I think of channels, I think of information. So, and I think of life. So that's coming through in her artwork. And she doesn't need to see them. She is seeing them from here and from here. So it's not necessarily needing to be interpreted. Sometimes people will ask me, well, what exactly are you saying? I can see it, I can feel it, and oftentimes I will give an interpretation in that moment. But if I were to break down word for word what the words that I'm saying specifically, it doesn't work that way for me all the time, because it's beyond the language that I have the capability of expressing in some moments in an English linear format. So these light codes, back to the artwork as an example, are just coming through. She's channeling that energy. So that's what that is. And we're channeling it from who we really are as a more expansive soul, not necessarily as, I'm expressing it in this form from multidimensional forms, right? Then I'm going to go, so I hope that it makes sense. So the next part of her question was, well, how, examples of if you're receiving it, what would I think, feel, or hear? So we'll talk briefly on that. You're receiving a download or an upload or an activation. It is a lot of different things, different feelings. And so we'll start with, and they all kind of go together. So I put here, language is all the senses. It isn't just, language is sensory. We feel it on our tongues. We use it in our throat. We're thinking, and then we're expressing it based on what we see and perceive with our senses. What we remember, our low tone, our high tone. It's the same thing with color. It's the same thing with movement, right? Are we moving fast or slow, linear and angled, or in circular motion? Those all have different vibrations held with our intention. I don't know if I covered that entirely. Before I forget, that intention is an energy. It is a frequency that we hold. As we are in that flow, we are then expressing light codes, or these light codes are lighting up through us and being expressed into the field around us. So I just wanted to share a little bit about intention in that formation. So what are we, when I get a download or an activation, what am I feeling, thinking, or seeing? So oftentimes it started out, I'll just get a little personal for a moment. Well, I'm kind of getting personal in all of this. It used to be, I didn't realize I was getting downloads. I would be in, well, I could start with goosebumps, but I'm going to get to that in just a minute. I'll start with the easiest one. Oftentimes, I would see pictures. I would go into meditation, and it would be right before I drift off to sleep, and all of a sudden, I'd get a poof flash. And I didn't, for years, really put two and two together. I would see these all the time, but I would just think it was just a flash. And then one day, I actually saw and remembered what I just saw. And it was a geometric shape. This happens all of the time to me. And it would be almost like, if you guys have ever done sun gazing, and I'm not telling you to do sun gazing, but I personally will do sun gazing, not every day, but most every day in form. So sun gazing, it's at sunrise or sunset when the sun is orange. And you look, I look above the sun, below the sun, to the right, to the left. Sometimes I'll swirl my eyes around it. Some people stare directly at it. I'm certainly not suggesting that you do that. But when you do these types of sun gazing and then you close your eyes, you will see things. And it's different every time. It isn't always just one thing. I just want to share that with you guys. Although in the beginning, it might just be the one thing, because like it was when I closed my eyes and I didn't recognize that I was having these shapes, I would just think it was a flash. But then all of a sudden, one day I went, that kind of had a shape to it. What did that shape look like? Synchronistically, I was walking and I saw it laying on the ground. And I've talked about this in other videos with you guys. When I go for walks, things are laying all around me that are hellos from the universe, that are in the shape of whatever I'm seeing. So for example, I don't know, maybe on the beach that day I saw a sand dollar. I'm going to use as an example. Because I had seen what looked like a star, like a sand dollar. And other times I see geometry. I see things I can't even explain. But oftentimes they come with flashes of color. Other times they just come with a flash. And sometimes they even look like a shadow. So if you close your eyes after looking at the sun, usually you might see like a black spot with the light, or you might see just a green color with black all around it. There's a lot of different things you might see. Generally, I'll close my eyes and I'll see stuff over here or over here. It's almost like I took a snapshot of the sun, which is a portal, and all the stuff that's going around this portal, going on around this portal. So that's a whole other video. But what I'm sharing is that in itself is a shape that's emitting, not omitting. I play with words, so when I think of omitting, I think of om sound. I go into this. Anyways, omitting, it's threading in a certain frequency that is creating a trigger or an activation or a memory for us. Whew. So that's one version of what it might look like. Now you might say, well, I don't see that. Well, it could also just be that thing lying on the ground that I saw and had goosebumps about. Because in that moment, those goosebumps can and I'm going to do like a really quick video on goosebumps and examples of it. For me, goosebumps are yes, unless they're on the back of my neck. But if they're all over my arms, it's a yes. It is, you're on the right track. It is, you're in flow right now. It is also a signal that I'm downloading or receiving or acknowledging something. And I love Dan Winter's work because he says goosebumps basically, and apologies on this if I'm not getting this 100% according to his meaning, but my interpretation is that we are, it means it's shared information. It's a shareable thought. So it's something that is valuable, worth sharing. So how many thoughts do we have throughout the day that are just like all over the place? And then when we have that aha moment, it's like, ring. That means that's something that I would love to share with the collective, which I'm doing right now. Or it could be in that moment I've asked this question, perhaps it's being shared with me from source, the collective sharing brain of source, love, light, source. That's a whole other video. But I say that about a lot of things, don't I? Because it's infinite, all the stuff we could talk about. So much fun. So that shared energy, that aha moment can be a form of what we're feeling when we're getting an activation. That doesn't mean we're always getting an activation when we get goosebumps. But that is one way that we can know, oh, that we might have just gotten a download. And a download can be interpreted in many ways. This is just one version of that interpretation. I also put, so what would I be thinking? Well, if you're thinking about something and you're remembering something from childhood that you forgot, you just had an ability to remember something that maybe needs to be released, right? And in essence, as soon as you do that, you're assisting in clearing out that frequency so you can receive more information. Again, from one perspective. There's many perspectives on this. Also, I put realize. So when I'm getting an activation or a download, sometimes it's just a realization, an aha moment where I'm like, I need to do this. Goosebumps, right? Sometimes it's just, I'm getting it right now. So sometimes it's just that realization, gosh, I need to clean out my closet. I don't need half the things in my closet anymore. Boom. That was a download. Is that a light code? Maybe. A form of it. Now, I'm obviously straying from the artwork. I'll get back to that. Because it can be as simple as going for a walk, having a realization that you just got a download. It might have come from the sun. It might have come up from the earth. It might have come from making eye contact with another starseed who reminded you of something that triggered that memory, that allowed you to realize that you were thinking about it, that allowed you to release that thought into the collective experience or to let it go. So the timelines I put too. It's also sometimes a light code that you might have picked up from your childhood that you didn't remember until this moment. I'm getting goosebumps on this a little bit. So you might have had a dream as a child about a unicorn and you forgot you had that dream, but then you saw Rachel's artwork, for example. She painted a unicorn and it looked just like the one you saw in a dream when you were 7. You guys see that mapping system on that? That's huge. That's an activation. That's a light code. She might have drawn that as a particular shape in the crystalline eyes of the unicorn. That might have been the trigger because it holds geometry or her intention behind the unicorn. Maybe when she was painting it, she was feeling inspired by her childhood. I could go on and on. It is really cool, you guys. We're in a hologram. We're in a matrix of our own creation, creating with one another in this playing field, and we're all connecting through these light codes. Okay, so these are some basic ones. In addition to that, it could be, I'm going to use, for example, light language, people that paint light language, but we don't know what it is, for example. They might go, I don't know what that means. But you might, in your years on Andromeda, or perhaps when you were an Egyptian, in a previous past lifetime, timelines, you see this picture of, I'm getting goosebumps because this happens to me all the time. You see a picture of a particular Egyptian goddess or deity, and you get this like flash. You may not remember that that light had a shape. It may have just been a flash of light, and that is a stimulation for your pineal gland. Or it's coming from inside of you, stimulating the pineal gland, moving up the spiral, the spine through inspiration, through visualization, all connecting the senses together and stimulating that recognition, that memory of Egypt, of that timeline. I could do another video, again, on what do I do with that? Sometimes it doesn't matter. You don't need to do anything. It's just a matter of recognizing that you're having something happen. Okay. So that can happen through all kinds of artwork. And I'm going to get to the Southern Cross at the end because this will kind of share an example of they didn't even realize they were talking to me, but they were. So so those are the thoughts. We can have thoughts about our past. We can have a random thought about a cat or a dog or an animal. I might have a meditation like I saw an orangutan the other day. And then since then, everything orangutan has been coming up in my world, bringing more to me because these animals need our love and intention of sharing our energy of love and light and appreciation for their beauty and the trees and the forest they live in. And it's helping me to be more conscious of what I'm doing in my environment and how I'm assisting. So that was an activation for me, right, in meditation. It can trigger ideas. So when we have, what thoughts might I have? I want to create this. I got to go see this person. Wow, I'm really drawn to the color blue. Wow, I really need to go jump in the water. Those are all downloads in many different versions and variations. What might I feel? And I could go on and on, you guys, on just that. I want to tie that in with thoughts aren't necessarily memories, but they work together, right? That's energy. Also, feelings. So it might trigger goosebumps. We talked a little bit about that. If you're doing artwork and you've got goosebumps, it's like, wow, you're in flow. Sometimes that's how it feels. You might get tingles. You might feel like you're floating away. Goosebumps, becoming sleepy, dizzy, hot, cold, pulsing here. Some people get like their back shoulder blades expand. I get a lot of tingles, like my wings are coming out, right? You might feel this expansiveness in the chest. You might get an opening in the stomach. Sometimes it feels like a warm liquid moving through the body. Sometimes these activations can feel in the back of the head or through the tingling in the crown. Sometimes the hands can heat up, like fire up. All of these are what one might feel. It might just be one of those things when they're having an activation that they're aware of. It might not be they feel anything, but they have a thought of that, what I talked about a moment ago. Deja vu. If you guys have seen The Matrix, I highly recommend that movie. It's soft disclosure, not so soft. The Matrix, where he goes, spoiler alert, he sees the cat, and it's like a glitch in the Matrix. It's a deja vu. Deja vu is a feeling or a memory. We could look at it many different ways. So you might go, I feel like I've been here before. That's not just a glitch in the Matrix. Sometimes that is, we just had an activation. We just had a memory, or that's a whole other video. But again, it could be that we've got some timelines that are converging. And that in itself could provide light codes in that moment that we're receiving downloads about, because that timeline that we're connecting with, maybe when we were 7 years old and dreamed about that unicorn, is coming back to us and we're feeling like we're there again. Or it could have already happened in the future and we're pulling it together. That's another, but you get maybe what I'm saying. You feel it. It feels like, whoa, this feels really weird. So that's one way of looking at it. It could be in that moment that has to do with activation. Doesn't always mean that. What would I see if I'm getting a download? And I kind of went through that. The geometric shapes. It could be pictures. It could be pictures associated with memories. It could be pictures associated with future versions of yourself that you may not know linearly. Sometimes I see, in the very beginning, I would see me. But I'd be like, who was that? I mean, I would see Aboriginal shamans. I would see chiefs. I would see a panther. I would see a blue person. I've seen lots of blue people. I've been blue quite a few times. But you might see that people's faces sometimes come up. And those aren't necessarily light codes in the same form of artwork. But if you see a piece of artwork and then you see a face flash, that is essentially a connection to something, right? Colors, a lot of people see colors. So those might be some of the sights that you see. And I put this as sight with an eyeball because, again, it's not necessarily seeing. It's sometimes seeing here, which we have a tendency to think that seeing with the third eye is a visual thing, and it's not. It's using all of the senses, and that's a video again. I should go back and watch this video, make a list of all the sidebars that we could go into. Maybe I'll do that sometime. You guys remind me. So what might I hear if I'm getting a download? And you guys, again, I'm using download interchangeably with upload or activation. They're not all the same. I'm just using that as a general term. Ringing in the ears. Tingling, which we talked about. What would I hear? You might hear a thought. You can hear thoughts sometimes. It's like you might hear song, you might hear sound. It might, I had another light worker that I work with on sessions, and we've had so much fun because he goes through these activations and he literally heard someone speaking to him the other day, just saying, you know, it's going to be all right. You're going to have this beautiful light. I mean, it was like he had to turn around and go, that's an activation. That's a download. It's a memory. It's a connection. So sometimes it isn't just about a download. It's a connection to then create that download. Because when you hear that, you're connecting with source, higher self, right? And then that's when the codes can come in because you're like, wow, I feel expansive. Messages, sometimes it'll come through. You hear something like, and I should do a video on, maybe I'll do a course on it, on what do these messages sound like? You know, what is this intuition? That's a lot of depth to go into that. But singing, song, words, sound, that's what you might hear. Or you might hear memories. You might all of a sudden hear something that somebody told you 10 years ago. And you're like, where did I hear that from? And it comes back up into you from your subconscious because of a trigger you just received from a piece of artwork you looked at that reminded you of when you were a kid, and it was a really important moment in your life that made you go, ring, open up, and now that can integrate. That activation, that or code that's been sitting in your field or in your collection to be recollected and harvested in this now moment. Boy, we're really going multidimensional here, guys. You might also smell something, meaning hopefully it's not something stinky, but it could be like roses. Do you guys remember the movie The Shining? I'm going there. I'm not recommending that you get necessarily watch that movie in particular. Sorry, Stephen King. He's very activating in a lot of ways, and he's definitely plugged into energy and frequency, and he can create even activations through his work. But I just want to say there's the kid in the story, The Shining, whenever he has these moments of like intuition, he smells oranges, I think, right? That's his thing. So we have, a lot of people have that sense of smell when something's going on. They'll smell something. Where do you think it comes, that sentence, I smell something, doesn't smell right, doesn't smell. Something smells funny. It is an extrasensory ability. It's like using that sense of smell and think about what a smell does for us. If we smell, I can use a shampoo that I used in high school, which I would never intentionally do anymore because anyways, but, and it'll trigger all of these memories to come flooding back, which I really like now because then I can go, oh, all right, I'm going to clear that. I'm going to integrate that. And I can feel it from a completely different perspective. So that's interesting. Smell can actually be activating. It holds packets of information more, I think, of memory in that example than perhaps a light code. And I may be misinterpreting that, but that's from my perspective. I'm not really comparing those two. They can be activating. But when you smell roses, because you're getting an activation is kind of what I'm more referring to in this, rather than that memory may hold an activation. Usually when it's something, the example that I just used is more of something that we need to release or clear oftentimes, unless it's associated with a good memory. I think I covered a lot of that. I want to do a video on how to know if we're just hearing a bunch of chatter versus if we're hearing our higher self. But this kind of, hopefully that answers your question, and so many more maybe. I'll end on, okay, people say all the time, so a light code, what do they look like and feel to me? They feel like all of those things I talked about. So when we think we can't see it, it's because we're not seeing it here with our eyeballs. That doesn't mean we're not seeing it here. So I wanted to kind of end on that note. And I'm just going to share briefly. So I'm going to pause this. So if you guys want to screenshot this, if you feel like it's something you feel guided to go back and read or look at. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Southern Cross. So I'm going to pause this. Okay, I was going to write the lyrics down, but I'm not going to. I'm going to try to keep this a little shorter and end it on that note. Sorry, poor plant. So maybe I'll write a few things down, but I'm just going to kind of go over this on my phone and then end on this note. So the reason I'm sharing the Southern Cross, oh, forgot to put my microphone on. The reason that I'm sharing this is because I'm not talking about the Southern Cross, by the way, the constellation. The reason I'm sharing this is I want to give an example of just one example. This isn't just artwork. Of downloads and activations. Sometimes you can see something and it reminds you of who you were. I talk about the hieroglyphs in Egypt and things like that. So if an artist shares a piece of artwork, it's coming through their intention and they have connections, let's say to Sirius. That might come through. They might draw something that they remember from Sirius. It doesn't necessarily have to be a light. It could just be a shape. It could be a color, and somebody else that had a lifetime on Sirius, for example, might really connect with that because it too reminds them of that connection to that lifetime. So that's another example of information. And this isn't necessarily, I didn't even get into the DNA and the light codes and packets of information, because that is, I'm just going on, that's another video entirely. So there is more to this. It's not just what I'm sharing as, this is more of an easier perspective. If you want to get science-based on what light codes and packets of information are, I will reserve that for another time or refer you to someone who can explain that a little bit better. I might be able to from one perspective, but that I don't want this video to go too long. So I'm going to share. If you read the lyrics for Southern Cross, oh, maybe I can share this. Zoom. This is, well, it doesn't matter. So got out of island on a boat for the, or got out of town on a boat for the Southern Islands. Now, first of all, I want to back up and share if you've ever heard Crosby, Stills, and Nash sing, whether you're a fan or not, and young. I don't know. I think it's just Crosby, Stills, and Nash, but they have, their sound in itself is very, can be very activating. Their tunes, their harmony. So when you hear music, it can help. And when they are singing with that intention, if you have a starseed singing, they are sharing their light with you and you're feeling it. So that's why and add that intention. And if that intention, and they're plugged into their heart, you can feel it. It's palpable. So that's another thing, that if an artist is truly inspired, that's what's going on. So it talks about sailing to reach before a following sea. All of this song is reading between the lines. Now, they wrote this song about going out on the ocean, their sailing adventure, maybe someone that, you know, it's about a love that he might have lost, but their love still endures, and it's beautiful. I see this as, whoa, they're talking to me. Or who's talking to me? My guides, it's me reading between the lines. So talks about making for the trades on the outside and the downhill run to Papapete, if I'm pronouncing that right. So all of a sudden, I happen to be looking up all this information about the Maori people. I had been looking up Tahiti. I had been looking up Moorea. And I was in flow about this. I've heard this song a million times. And all of a sudden, I heard this song, and everything in me went ring, because I was in a different place and I was receiving different packets of information, and this pulled through to then trigger memories about Papapete, about talks about when he says reaching before a following sea. I literally saw myself reaching to the ocean, and I saw a following sea as behind me, that it's a past life experience. And I saw it as seeing. Off the wind on this heading lie the Marquesas. So I saw that as, where is this Marquesa? And as soon as I saw that, it was like, ring. We got 80 feet of water line nicely making way. Well, I saw that as 8. I could go on and on. A noisy bar in Avalon, I tried to call you. I saw that maybe he was in a place called Avalon. I saw my higher self calling me, literally, ring, through this song. I'm getting goosebumps. Through these connections, and when this happened, and I was in this space of receiving all of this, light codes were pouring in. I was just like, everything was activating. Memories were being triggered. I was seeing colors. I was seeing pictures of something that I couldn't put my finger on, right? And in a noisy bar in Avalon, I tried to call you. So there's this other dimension that I am trying to call myself right now. And it's on a midnight watch, I realized why twice you ran away. They've tried this before and it hasn't really worked, or I didn't want to face it. I didn't want to be in that space. And I could go on and on about this. And of course, midnight, we have so many read between the lines on what that means. Think about how many times I have fallen. Spirits are using me, larger voices calling. Well, that's pretty self-explanatory. And think about how many times maybe this hasn't worked in the same way. Or how many times have we done something in a past life and we thought we failed? So this is like so between the lines on this song, maybe for a lot of people, and they don't even realize why they like this song so much. What heaven brought you and me cannot be forgotten. This isn't just about a person, a love. This is like us, what heaven has brought to us. We are here living this. I've been looking around the world for that woman girl, inner child, growing up in divine feminine balance. Not just a woman, not just a girl, not just a man, not just a boy. Right? This is that reunification. Who knows love can endure, and you know it will. So it's like I see that we know inside of us, right, that it will. We cheated, we lied, and we tested. And we never failed to fail. It was the easiest thing to do. This is so easy to we're looking at that because it is easier to ignore it and to run away. But part of us, we agreed to do this, okay? You will survive being bested. Somebody fine will come along, make me forget about loving you in the Southern Cross. I still, to this day, it like almost brings tears to my eyes. So I think he also talks about, I missed a big part. Oh, hello. I think I skipped the women girl. So when you see the Southern Cross, you know now why you came this way. The truth you might be running from is so small, but it's the promise, it's big as the promise of a coming day. So it's like the truth is bigger than, we don't want to deal with our sometimes, and I didn't mean to go into this full thing, but I'm just doing it since I'm here and you're here and we'll just talk about this. Basically, we're looking at, I obviously was reading between the lines. You guys can read between the lines. You can see what that means. I'm sailing for tomorrow. My dreams are dying. And my love is an anchor tied to you, tied with the silver chain. Hello. Whenever I do visualizations and meditations, I picture myself being anchored to the heavens and to source energy through a silver chain, and to the earth through a silver chain of energy, or platinum. I was just like, I have my ship and all her flags are flying. This is my ship. All my chakras are lining up and they are expanding and we are open, right? She is all I have left and music is her name. Music is the sound of the spheres. Music is, sound is creation. It is everything. It is in everything, sound. So also the reference to music is her name, right? We identify with music. And rather than identifying with a name, although a name is powerful as well, and that holds a vibration and a frequency, what sound do I want my name to present, right? Also, naming of music is basically, we're going back to basics. We're going back to the truth of what we are, which is sound, which is love, which is frequency, which is beautiful music. And then I skipped over to think about how many times I have fallen. So I'm sharing this with you guys because this is a perfect example of a highly activating song. Not necessarily whoever wrote that, whichever one of those guys wrote that song, they were inspired when they wrote it. And they were channeling this through love of a person, through love of the ocean, through love of sailing. And that came through them, that I see it as speaking to me in a completely different language than maybe that what they were presenting. But the energy behind it is so strong, and it ties together so many trigger words, such as these places, the Southern Cross, Papapete, Marquesas, and Avalon. Just saying those words, people can go, what? And so artwork can do that. Somebody might draw a picture of a lion with, and I think one of the pieces of art, I'm using Rachel as an example because this was her question where I started and I'm going to end it on this note. She has a lion that reminds me of Lyran energy. And Rachel may have experienced a lifetime as a Lyran feline frequency holder. So she holds that code and it comes through in her artwork. And other people see that and go, wow. So this is how it works, guys. So I'm going to end on this note, much longer than I expected to go, as usual. But what I want to share also is, if you are an artist, a musician, and all of these things, recognize that it's bigger than, that sometimes the truth is bigger than us. So keep doing what you're doing. Feel your inspiration come through in your form, in formation. Because as a starseed, we came here to share this. And we don't necessarily have to understand it. If we're here and we're in our hearts, that's what it's all about. It isn't necessarily, well, this is why I did it and this is what it meant for me and I felt this way when I was doing it. That's beautiful too. It's not necessary to have to know. And that's one of the beautiful things. It's about trusting that everything is unfolding in this divine form, information. I also want to share too, I highly recommend you guys go on Instagram. You can find me. I share a lot of artwork that's inspiring. It's a beautiful place to share. I know Facebook is too, and I'll eventually get into that, not modality, what do you call it? Here I go again, technology platform to share as well. But I just find Instagram so much easier. I have to learn Facebook again. So, but what I mean is you might be an artist as you share this across the Facebook platform or Patreon or whatever it might be. You are sending out that inspiration in a flow information, and people will be drawn to your work because that's the new. It's always been like that, but it's not just a new platform. Why do you think everybody loved Da Vinci? Da Vinci was, all of his work is coded. It's light encoded with the golden ratio, the golden spiral, the golden, anyways, so you get where I'm going with this. And so many other artists too. Salvador Dali. Whoa, talk about codes. So, yeah, I hope that covered a lot of it. I know I could just keep going. But alas, I have other things to work on in this now moment. So hopefully you found this informative or thoughtful, or you felt good when you listened to it. Either way, that's what this is all about. I'm very grateful for you guys sharing in this now moment with myself. I want to just say, find me on Instagram at Keep It Simple Starseeds. You can look up all of these other, I subscribe to a lot of other artists who you know, I will provide some artists. If you're an artist and you're watching this and you know that you're providing light coded information from a high vibration of love and light only, because again, we're here to inspirational, to raise our frequency and vibration. That's my intention with these videos. So if that's something that you feel like you're doing, or you're really inspired to do that, and you're really in your heart, share that information. You're more than welcome to add a comment, add your link. It might get stopped in my spam. I don't know. You can just say, hey, this is my artwork. Provide your link through Instagram. And then if you're on Facebook, find me. You can follow me on Carrie Yvonne. I'm on at Keep It Simple Starseeds. And that's how it works, guys. We're sharing with one another. Not too much information, please. Just your link to Instagram, preferably, or YouTube, or Facebook, or whatever. And if you have a little like blurb that you want to say about it, you can do that as well. And I'll do my best to just kind of share that information. But it's already shared, because when you comment, anybody who watches this video can then look at the comments in case I don't get a chance or don't see it on Instagram, or that's not obviously my purpose on Instagram, is to share what my inspiration is in my flow format. But again, it's a platform for all of us to connect. So you're more than welcome to share those in the comment section and play. And who knows, you might meet up with other artists and so on and so forth. This isn't just art, guys. It's whatever you're doing that's light encoded in the highest levels of love light. So in love and light, guys, thank you so much. Namaste.